Welcome to the Save What You Love podcast. I'm your host, Mark Titus. Today on the show, I welcome all the way from Scotland, Howard Wood. Howard was born in 1954 and has lived on the Isle of Arran since the age of 14. He's been diving the seas around Arran in Scotland since 1973. In 1995, he and fellow diver Don MacNeish set up the Community of Arran Seabed Trust, or COAST. Since 2003, Howard has spent the majority of his time volunteering with COAST. He has an extensive knowledge of the marine environment in the Clyde, has created a photographic and video archive of Arran marine life, and was COAST's chair for 10 years before stepping down in 2018. Howard was involved in writing marine management proposals to the Scottish government, including the final Arran Marine Regeneration trial proposal of February 2005. These led to the creation of a no-take zone in Lamlash Bay, designated in 2008. He was also a key primary source of marine survey records supporting the COAST South Arran Marine Protected Area proposal, designated in 2014. Since designation, he has led baseline surveys of the area. Howard has attended many meetings with government, Scottish Natural Heritage, Marine Scotland, and fishermen associations, and has also appeared before parliamentary committees on a number of occasions. Howard received the Goldman Environmental Prize in April 2015 for his work with COAST, and was awarded an Obie for services to the marine environment in 2015. Howard and COAST are recently part of the epic PBS documentary, Hope in the Water. I hope you enjoy this episode. It was such an honor to talk with Howard, and we'll see you down the trail.
How do you say what you love when the world is burning down? How do you say what you love when pushes come to shove? How do you say what you love when things are upside down? How do you say what you love when times are getting tough?
Howard Wood, welcome. Where are you today? Where are you coming from?
Well, lovely to speak to you, Mark. I'm sitting at home in Whiting Bay on the Isle of Arran, which is on the west coast of Scotland.
It is indeed. It's I have not been, but I've been to Northern Ireland, so I could look almost across and almost up and see where you are, and it is gorgeous country. My ancestors, at least on one side of my family, on my dad's family, came from the west of Ireland, and a deep love in my heart for that part of the world. I would love to hear your story, sir. You have such an incredible story about resilience and putting the time and the effort in a very daunting challenge. We got all the time in the world, so don't hold back. Start from the beginning. Tell us your story. How did you get into this work that you love?
How did I get into it? I suppose I got into it because of my love of diving. And I learnt to dive 50 years ago this spring, in March 1974. And initially, I didn't go willingly to the training. I had a big friend at the time called Robert, and still have a friend called Robert. He was actually he now lives in Canada. But he was over the last few weeks to go to celebrate his 70th birthday, and Robert dragged me along to the training against my will, to be honest. I wasn't that keen, but then after 2 or 3 months training and the first dives in the spring of that year, I as I said numerous times, I took to it like a duck to water. We both did. And really enjoyed it. So my kind of and my first 20 years of diving weren't particularly all that involved in conservation. I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the exploring, and kind of the lots of places we dived. Probably nobody had dived before. We dived shipwrecks, we dived from the shore, we dived rocky reefs. I mean, I just loved it. I was, though, well, I was in my 20s and 30s. I was getting married, I was in children. I was growing a family business. So all these things take precedent. But what triggered off the kind of conservation side was my friend and co-founder of Coast, a man called Don MacNeish. And Don, I mean, I still see him every week. He lives in the next village. And we dived together for over a decade. And we became more and more concerned over the state of the sea around our island, about what we were seeing, or to be honest, what we were lacking seeing, which we'd seen 5 years previous. And in those days, in the late 1980s and early 1990s, we weren't up to date with what was happening in fisheries management. We didn't really know. We just knew things were disappearing. You know, 2 or 3 years before, we would swim across the sandy bay and see lots of plaice and dabs, and if we're lucky, a nice big turbot. And and one of the great things about diving those days, I mean, it's how you got your dinner quite often. You know, a few scallops in the bag and a nice plaice for dinner. But of course, eventually we were seeing less and less fat fish. We were seeing less and less whitefish, and we had an inkling about why that was happening, that we were seeing more and more scallop dredging, we were seeing more and more bottom trawling, and we started to look into it, and we found that there'd been a major change in legislation in 1984. Up until that point, from 1869 to 1984, we'd had a mechanism called an inshore limit that didn't allow trawling, bottom trawling, within 3 miles of the shore. And under pressure from certain parts of the fishing industry and the kind of deregulation of the Margaret Thatcher years in the 1980s, that inshore limit was abandoned. And we noticed it within a few years that we were having, these weren't huge trawlers, these were still only 50, 60-foot trawlers. But there was nothing stopping them coming right up the shore. And common sense tells you that this isn't really good for the seabed, it's not good for the important habitats. But at that point, it was basically just common sense. And we would talk to local fishermen who were also angry about it, much more small scale, what I call now low impact fishermen. They had never been happy about it. They had written and complained in 1984 when this was going to happen. And we weren't really involved in that, but slowly through the late 1980s, early 1990s, we talked, and we kind of shrugged our shoulders, and we thought, well, what can we do? But Don being Don, and I was always jealous of his travels around the world. He had relatives in New Zealand, and every couple of winters he would disappear for 6 weeks to New Zealand. And in about 1989, 1990, he came back from New Zealand and said, you know, I looked out and I met a man called Dr. Bill Ballantyne from Auckland University. And I looked him out because he and his colleagues 10, 15 years earlier that set up what became known as the world's first full marine reserve, a no-take zone.
No-take zone.
A no-take zone off Lee in the north of Auckland. And Don said, that's what we should do. And I said, well, it sounds like an interesting idea. Let's look into it. Let's move it forward. We tried to, and we made no ground at all over 4 or 5 years.
Mm.
It was very, very difficult. The kind of concept of marine reserves wasn't. They talked about it. Different government agencies talked about it, but it wasn't on their agenda at all. And we, after a few years of talking, we were both very busy, married, all had kids, and so it was a kind of talking point, and letters were written. Letters were written to politicians, letters were written to ministers, and we very rarely actually got a response. But what we realized after a few years, we started looking into marine reserves around the world, and we realized that during the 1980s, the UK actually had a Nature Conservation Act, which actually allowed marine areas. And in the United Kingdom's called United Kingdom because it comprises of 4 countries. And in England, they set up Lundy Marine Area, and in Wales they set up Scoma, and in Northern Ireland they set up Strandford Loch as a marine area of conservation, and in Scotland we couldn't find where they'd set it up, and the reason was it failed. So the area they were going to, the government had identified was an area quite close to us as the crow flies, around the sea loch's quite a long way. It was Loch Sween in Argyll. I mean, and I've dived that over the last 20 years. It's absolutely amazing sea loch. But it was a top-down initiative by government and government nature organisation called Conservancy Council and Scottish Natural Heritage. And the locals didn't like being told what they could do and what was going to happen.
Sure.
Certain aspects of the fish industry basically did not want them, and basically went around and said, this is going to close the whole village. This is going to close everything, such. And within 2 years, it was pulled. It didn't happen. So we looked at that and we thought, well, that's not the way to go about it. If we're going to move forward with marine reserves, we need the community on board. So in 1995, Don came up with the name Coast, the community of Arran Seabed Trust. And from then on, we would talk to anybody who would talk to us, and we would build this organization, this community body.
That's fantastic. So this is something that we're familiar with here on the west coast of North America too. We've watched our salmon populations decline. We've seen the examples from Europe, from your part of the world, from the east coast of the United States and North America, and then now to the west coast. And there was a time in the late 1800s where it was actually an admiral in the U.S. Navy who suggested a salmon refugia zone that would do exactly what you are in the work of doing right now and have done successfully. And of course, the folks at the time, during that time, thought, well, what's at issue here is this overfishing, but we want to also be able to exploit the land. So, as far as logging and mining and damming and those sorts of things. So here we'll come up with a better idea. We'll create more fish. We'll make these new fish, man-made fish, and that's where hatcheries got popular here on the West Coast. And they just scrapped the idea entirely, of course, because industry was pushing behind that. So what were some of the biggest forces that obviously getting the word out, and you're dealing with government, but were you also dealing with industry and other external forces that you were pushing the giant rock up the hill against during all this time of trying to create coast and the marine protections, the no-take zone that we'll get to the success part here in a little bit. But what were some of those other external forces that you were fighting against?
Yeah, so initially on the island, not a lot. 100 years ago, Arran had a vibrant herring industry. Um, and that kind of as things modernize and your larger boats, because you're on an island, you don't really have a market. So we at that point in the late 1990s, 2000, we just had 8 registered fishermen on the island, right? 8
Wow.
commercial,
Wow.
all those low impact, both creel, which is like lobster pot type things, and dive shellfish. And the great thing about islands is, and an island of our size, which is like 4,600 people, is um, there's not many people you don't know. And at
Right.
that point, I was running a business employing 12 people. Everybody knew me. Don Tracy's family back 6 generations. When we look back on how we succeeded at that point, a lot of it was to do with we were 2 locals who were trusted. We hadn't come in and were telling people what to do. We were talking to people who we had known and worked with for 20, 30 years. So in meeting the local fishermen, literally one evening, we kind of came to an agreement that, you know, a small area put aside, would they support it? And basically, by the end of the evening, we did take a couple of bites of beer over in the pub to kind of that. But by the end of the evening, they had said, yeah, we will support this.
Wow.
And what we found then was it was really important on a regular basis to keep them informed about what we're doing and what meetings we were having, and just keep them informed. Now, as we progressed and finally got meetings with government officials in the fisheries department, they immediately said, well, of course, you need to meet the mainland fishermen, which are the bigger fishermen's organizations.
Sure.
And we agreed, of course we do. And so we met with 2 or 3 of the fishermen's associations around the Clyde. Now, for those who don't know the Clyde, I mean, the Firth of Clyde, it's not the river, or although the river comes out, it's a huge body of water, 3,700 square kilometers.
Wow.
And it has the whole, what we call the mainland side on the Ayrshire side, and then the Argyll side on the other, and we're the large island right in the middle. And so we went to meet the different fishermen's organizations, and the low impact guys that we met a couple of times, they thought it was a great idea. They had one misgiving, and that was that the current proposal wasn't big enough. They wanted it bigger, and we thought, okay, right, well that's good. That's that. We went to see what we call the mobile fishermen's organizations, which represent more dredging, trawling, but also some creeling. And the individual fishermen in the first couple of meetings were also fairly positive. They basically said, well, what have we got to lose? The fishery is in such a poor state. You know, they were willing to support it. But what was interesting in the following weeks was when we went back to the head of inshore fisheries, and said, well, we seem to have got more or less agreement. She said, well, I don't think so, because the mobile fisheries leader said you came to see them, but they didn't really understand what you're talking about. And so we kind of realized that there's a difference in talking to individual fishermen than talking to their associations.
Sure.
And it took us a long time to realize that the bigger fishermen's organizations in Scotland really do not want other communities and potentially non-fishermen involved in fisheries management. And so that was a big hurdle, which is an ongoing hurdle at the moment, to this day. But that didn't stop us having regular meetings with them. And we did find a lot of common ground, although it was very difficult.
Well, we're going to come back to, again, as promised, we're going to come back to the victories that you've achieved in just a moment. But just also want to hearken to the other similarity with what's going on here in this part of the world, up in Alaska, we have, you may be familiar, this pretty severe issue of bycatch with trawlers. And yep, and this is a very hot topic here. And these are large companies, billion-dollar seafood companies. And there is what appears to be, it's difficult for the public to get information that is clear and understandable. There's the organizations that I align with many times, folks like Salmon State in Alaska, have data that corroborate the accusations that these giant trawlers are harvesting tens of thousands of pounds of endangered king salmon, and they're not the target species, so they get thrown dead over the side. And anyway, it's kind of the fog of war, right? And so it's really difficult to pierce that and attain precise information, or even information that is relevant to moving the needle forward on actions. And so my question to you in that, given, you've got government, which is a giant, massive entity, and then you've got large fishing organizations, how did you persist and pierce that fog to get the information and the tools necessary to move the cause forward with Coast and a no-take zone?
We tried to find as much ground that we could agree on, and
Right.
we would sit there and say, well, we're not going to agree on these other areas. We've got major differences. Let's try and move forward with that.
Mm-hmm.
We did have the Scottish government did help with putting intermediaries, so chairs of meetings, and we tried to move that forward. But with the no-take zone, because our proposal was much more than a no-take zone in the first, it was a no-take zone, an MPA, and an overspill area, because we wanted a trial to trial spatial management and full no-take zone, and to see if there was going to be and an area that nothing would be, well, managed, but everything that was caught would be measured. And so that was our proposal. What happened is it was a real struggle to move it forward. The government's nature organization, the Scottish Natural Heritage, the different fishermen's organizations knew what we were moving forward. Quite often, the low impact fishermen's organizations were denied a seat at the table, which wasn't correct, and we kept pointing that out.
Yeah.
And we didn't move forward that much. But what so what we did was, our backgrounds are not politics and media and all. I mean, I come from horticulture, and Don comes from a kind of blacksmith and iron foundry and
Wow. That's great.
So that's our backgrounds. But we kind of had to quickly learn, and it was quite easy because we attracted lots and lots of like-minded people who would help us with the media, and like-minded actually politicians who would help us. And so one of those politicians, who wasn't local to ourselves, but we had got to know him, was a gentleman called Rob Gibson. Now, Rob's retired from Parliament now, but Rob said, look, we're kind of stuck at the moment. Why don't you put a petition into Parliament? And if you put a petition in, get as many signatures as you can, and then we can try, if we can persuade across party groups, to move the petition onto a much more powerful environment committee. And the environment committee will be able to ask the minister direct questions and hold him to account. So we started that in 2004, 2005, and over a 2-year period till 2006, we appeared before different parliamentary committees. So that was myself, Don, our secretary, Tom, and we were supported by at these committee meetings, you could invite witnesses. The fishing industry would invite witnesses, and we would have academics. We had Professor Callum Roberts. We had small-scale fishermen representing us, and we would also have recreational sea angling. And so all these in these parliamentary committees, we would also pre them and after them make sure that we gave some good media releases. And so it was not only locally, but we were trying to get national media, which is much more difficult.
Yeah.
And we were successful. We were successful because we had made contact with some really good people who could see that this was quite a good story. And so we learned all this. And it was actually the Environment Committee that kind of cracked open the no-take zone by pushing both government and the big fishing industry leaders to sit down and talk out through. And the industry leaders came up with, they said, well, if we support this no-take zone, we'd quite like to experiment with the scallop regeneration area. With it, and we thought, yeah, we could talk about this, and we could amalgamate the two, so we've got similar things, and so we managed to progress it like that. But those talks took 2 years, every 2 or 3 months.
So we're moving toward this moment in time. What, for our listeners, what was that aha moment? What was that large breakthrough when you knew? It's kind of like a band, when I always wonder about this, when the Rolling Stones knew that Can't Get No Satisfaction is gonna be this. There's this light bulb that turns on. You're like, I think we're really onto something here. Was there a moment like that for you when you were like, okay, we've been pounding the pavement, we've been doing this work for years and years and years? What was that light bulb moment when you're like, I think we're going to get something done here? What did that look like for you?
It was probably 2 or 3 little inklings. One of them was when we managed to persuade both the fishermen's leaders and SNH to appear live on BBC News. And so we through different contacts we have in the media, we managed to have an all-day broadcast from Lamlash Bay that went out every hour on the hour by a satellite truck, and we all sat around, and the BBC reporter, you can actually look it up. It's on YouTube. I got all the kind of edits and edited it together. So we had everybody's voice, the fishing leader's voice, the government nature conservation person's voice, Don's voice, myself's voice, and we kind of sat around and interviewed area. And at the end of that day, I thought, right, it's going to be very difficult to not do it now. Cool. we are getting there, but there were still lots of hurdles to get over, because that was still like a year before it was actually designated.
So we're talking this BBC moment in time was 2011-ish?
No, 2007, I think.
7. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Halftime. Did you know you could have the world's finest wild salmon shipped directly to your door? It's true. Our Ava's Wild Bristol Bay sockeye salmon is the lowest carbon footprint center plate protein on the planet, and it's packed with heart-healthy omega-3 fatty acids. Don't take our word for it. Ask chefs like Seattle's Tom Douglas and Taichi Kitamura, who are serving our sashimi-grade wild salmon in their award-winning restaurants. You can have the exact same fillets we deliver to them, shipped flash frozen to your door. What's more, Ava's Wild donates 10% of our profits to Indigenous-led efforts to protect Bristol Bay in perpetuity. That's the place we source the salmon from. Right now, that looks like supporting the Bristol Bay Foundation, granting Bristol Bay's Indigenous young people scholarships to 4-year colleges, universities, and trade schools. Visit avaswild.com to join our growing community doing good by eating right. That's save, spelled backwards, wild.com, and eat wild to save wild. Now, back to the show. So then, as promised, where did all of this incredible effort by you and so many people, so many of your friends and neighbors and compatriots, where did this ultimately lead us to? What did and this is an ongoing story, of course. It's not like you get the prize and it's over and everything's always done. You know, we all know that. We have to be vigilant. But what was the result of all of this effort to create a no-take zone and create real lasting protection for this place that you love?
Yeah, I think there's multiple areas. One of the area is that by that time you realize actually that we had quite a good, well-organized organization.
Mm-hmm.
And the people involved in it, and it wasn't just myself and Don, you know, there were a lot of people involved in it, both committee members and supporters and volunteers. They'd all become pretty wise, educated. They knew their stuff. They knew their stuff on fishing. They knew the issues that we were also battling. Open pen salmon farms at the time, so we had multiple campaigns going. And we kind of became quite an effective campaigning organization. And that was because we, unknown to us, we'd actually been building like an education side. We'd been gathering all the information and making it freely available among many people. The other thing one of the things that I did was I started collecting any photographs or any video I could, going back as far as possible. And of course, commercial fishing had been large, but then small, but recreational sea angling was huge on the island, pre the demise of whitefish. But that was only 10, 15 years ago. So I started collecting this huge archive of photographs. And that was really important in the campaign and the media side, because it showed people, local people, you would go and give film shows, and you would have, oh, look, there's my next door neighbor James, and he's holding a huge big pollock. And I said, yeah, isn't it crap? That's just 12 years ago. What do you think he'd catch now?
Right.
And they just turn around and say, well, maybe get a few mackerel, that's it. Now, those visual images and then eventually video imaging became really, really powerful in persuading people and also getting the message out publicly. I know I've gone a little bit off track on that, but that's a really important area.
It's important to hear how this was fomented and how what type of tools you had and used, and what I'm hearing is just so much patience and perseverance. I mean, as you pointed out several times, you guys aren't full-time activists, you know, getting paid giant amounts of money from a giant NGO. You've got lives, you got kids, you got families, you've got your own careers, and so it's fascinating and inspiring to hear all of these pieces that you cultivated to get to the end result that you're hoping for. And I think that's what we're talking about, is that end result. And have you achieved what you've hoped to do with Coast and an organization, and as a personal citizen, a person who loves the land and water that is your home? Do you feel like you've achieved those things? And if so, what do those things look like? Also, last part of that question is, where do you need to go from here?
Well, when I look back from our initial hopeful proposals, we've actually achieved a lot more than the initial no-take zone. We achieved the no-take zone in 2008, and then government moved forward with the Marine Scotland Act, which was to so the no-take zone was against. There was no actual act that was relevant to it. We just had very clever legal advice lawyers who said it was actually perfectly possible with fisheries legislation. And that's how we went down fisheries legislation and pushed the minister that he had the right, if he had enough community backing and there were right circumstances, to actually close an area. But eventually, 2010 onwards, the government were moving forward with the legislation that would be able to bring in a network of marine protected areas. Now, marine protected areas aren't full marine reserves like no-take zones. I would look on them as areas that allow low impact fishing, but exclude the higher impact. Government don't quite look on it like that at the moment. They will do it. It'll take them another 10 years, but we will get there. So that's an ongoing battle there. So in achievements, yeah, we and the community have achieved way more than we set out 25, 30 years to achieve. Because not only did we achieve the very small no-take zone, we achieved a marine protected area around half the island out to 3 miles.
Wow.
That I think is 220 square kilometers. I mean, it's very large. Now, the other thing that we've had to do, because although government said they would, it was kind of half-hearted. We've had to set up our own research. So with the no-take zone coming in, and in 2008 and in 2016, the management of a huge, big marine protected area, that is being monitored by ourselves with our academic partners. Government monitor it a little bit, but it's stretched to try and monitor a whole country. As usual, doesn't have the resources, doesn't have the funding. And so that has been a huge, huge part of what Coast have done, and what I've been involved in. I mean, I've learned to become an amateur scientist.
Sure.
I've learned to do seabed surveys. I've tutored academics who come in. The one thing about myself and Don is we over our diving careers, we did quite a bit of commercial work. So we would do moorings and pier jobs on ferries, this, that. And so we built up the skills so that when the young academics come on their masters, their PhDs to do research, for the first week, I would be with them to show them how to work underwater.
Great.
You know, being able to dive is great, but there's a big difference being able to dive and actually being able to dive and do research underwater. Your diving has to become completely naturally, is that you know, you've got to go back into dive mode, but your emphasis is on your research and doing your quadrants, you're doing your squares. So to me, that's the area I love. I mean, I just love diving. I love discovering things. Nowadays, I just love seeing the difference that closing areas makes. The seabed just springs back to life.
You're reading my mind, Howard. I was just going to say, so what have you observed since the early 2010s, since we've had this protection in place? Have things bounced back?
Yeah. In the no-take zone, which is a small area, it's only 2.67 square kilometers. It only covers a third of the Lamlash Bay. Recovery was slow to start off with for the first 2 or 3 years. We worked with the University of York, with the master's students, with the PhDs from the University of York, and monitored it. But eventually, slowly over about 6, 7, 8 years, lobsters started increasing to 3 times as much, 4 times as much, and then the lobsters dropped and then recovered. The scallop numbers kept rising and slowly kept rising. The seabed benthic complexity. So instead of it being sand, gravel's all dredged away, we start seeing all the algae, the red algae, brown seaweeds, the hydroids, bryozoans, soft corals. As it slowly builds, it slowly becomes more complex. And with that complexity, this attracts more life. Now, if you're a fish or a shrimp, would you rather live on a sandy seabed that's been dredged away, or somewhere there's lots of cover to hide, lots of areas to feed? It's kind of common sense that complex inshore seabeds are so important. And what the government have allowed to do in Scotland is terrible, in allowing 70 or 80% of our inshore seabeds to be dredged and trawled, because in the end it kills the fishing industry.
Sure it does. And you know, that's why we see fishermen in Bristol Bay, Alaska, which is I've been featuring in my films, and it's where we source the salmon. I have a salmon business. The fishermen are totally down to stand down and allow the amount of fish that need to get up into the river system to get there. Why? Because obviously there's a lot of love in their heart for this place, but also it's their livelihood, just like you said. I mean, there's both things, and I think when you're combining the economic reality of things with a deep love for place and the water and the land, you're going to move the needle. And the last piece, of course, is the work like you're doing, Howard. The people that you and Don and your incredible network of people have bonded together because of this love of place. I wanted to ask you, move the needle here a little bit different direction. And recently you were appearing in the PBS documentary Hope in the Water. How was that experience working with those folks? And there's three parts to this question. How was the experience for you? The second part is, are you hopeful that the broadcast is going to bring better results because of the wider amount of people that are going to see this issue? And third part is just the broadest part of it. Are you hopeful in general, based on the work that you do, for maintaining and recovering areas of the ocean that we need to recover?
Right. Okay. I'll see if I remember all three of those.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's
Okay.
start with working on the show. Was that a fun experience?
It was.
Yeah.
What I was really impressed with the Intuitive Content who filmed it. Over 20 years, we've been filmed by numerous production companies, from BBC to Channel 4, numerous ones. All of them are fine, but they were not just a level above; they were well a level above. Right. Their researchers went into every single fine detail, and they wanted to know everything. And when they initially phoned me, I think it was a lady called Sarah. She knew our Coast website better than me, and that is a good researcher.
That's right.
So they were very professional. They all arrived on Arran, and there were about 14 or 15 from the States and a crew from Scotland. Mm-hmm. When we've been filmed before, there's normally 2 or 3 people. They all descended on my house and my wife, just about 19 people, 3 huge vans. And so it was quite an experience. And so for the next 3.5 days, we were filmed. Mm-hmm. We would what I was really pleased about was we could get so many people in the community that have been involved in the film.
Great.
Both in the public meeting and in the local pub restaurant. And you saw all the faces. When they initially contacted me, they said, "Oh, we want to make a film about Coast and you." And I was kind of wary because I you can't, one person can't do this.
That's right.
It's a whole community. Yes, the community needs a leader, things like that. But if you go off by yourself, just like myself and Don did in the first 4 or 5 years, you get nowhere. You get nowhere. So the great thing about the film was it 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 had lots and lots of the locals in, and not only that, for it was kind of from filming to actually seeing a first draft was quite a long time,
Sure.
and we were quite nervous about the angle it was going to do. But we saw a first draft about February, March of this year. And to be honest, neither me or Don could believe it. We could not believe how 25 plus years of our life had been put down into under 25 minutes, and it was so accurate.
That's great.
So yeah, they did a fantastic job. And the other angle that we liked was that we always get bracketed with environmentalist, and I've
Sure.
just got used to it over the years. You get used to it, and obviously I'm really proud of winning the Goldman Environmental Award. But we didn't start off as environmentalists. We start off as community that are actually concerned about our seas, that have sustained the people on our island. And so it's getting this balance of sustainability of both fishing and sustainable forms of aquaculture to feed us. And and so not all environmentalists, but some environmentalists can go over the top too far to one way, and you kind of looked on as you want to stop everything. Well, and obviously, if you're trying to bring in a no-take zone, you're constantly being accused of you're trying to close down the industry, you're trying to stop everything. And nothing could be further from the truth. And I hope, Hoping in the Water gets that across. And in the other films that I've seen from it, they're incredible as well.
Right.
Of people working away to try and change around and bring sustainable seafood, sustainable aquaculture to our communities.
Well, I think that's a good place to start wrapping this up. And this is, folks listening, this is just scratching the surface on the work that Coast is doing, the work that Howard and Don and their cohort have done. I mean, we didn't get into so many of the other things that you guys have achieved over this time. You have a marine center. But suffice to say, this is such a hopeful story. And Howard, does this, this work that you have done over the course of your life and your career, and then dovetailing with what you just said about all these other stories in the series, the PBS series Hope in the Water, does this give you a hopeful sense for the future? I mean, we've got huge challenges, and we all know that. But doing one thing at a time based around community, does this give you a hopeful sense of what is possible for recovery with the things we love, especially our oceans?
It does. I won't say I'm not. There are times when it doesn't get me down.
Sure.
Both the biodiversity crisis and climate change, but whether it's Coast or whether it's lots of other communities around the world, I was fortunate by the Goldman Prize. I get invited to quite a selection of different conferences and things, and
Sure.
last October, myself and other prize winners were invited to the IUCN International Leaders Conference in Geneva, which was people from all around the world, and that gave you hope, because the main talking point that came out of it was that it was communities that were making the biggest difference. And like I was sat there thinking, yeah, I know this, but actually it's great to listen to all these world leaders and people saying, the people that are making the big difference are communities, because well-educated, well-organized communities can make the change. And so I sincerely believe that. And one of the other areas that Hope in the Water doesn't cover and we haven't covered is that
Sure.
founded by Coast with the help of Fauna and Flora International, we now have nearly 30 communities around Scotland. All they're not clones of Coast because they're all doing what their community want. So we founded a coastal community network all around Scotland about with people and communities pressuring, lobbying government and local officials to recover and maintain and then sustainably use their local resources.
Amazing. Howard, to wrap this up today, and rest assured, I'm going to have an intro that folks will be listening to, describing a lot more of the work that you all have done. But I'd just love to get a little personal view. You know, most of our listeners are going to be on the West Coast of the United States, maybe haven't been to Scotland or the UK. Can you just paint us a picture of what it's like? What do you love about living on your home island of Arran?
Well, for many of your listeners, I've been very fortunate in traveling many places and have many relatives, and so I've been to British Columbia and I've been to Vancouver Island and I've been to a lot of places like that. And Scotland is not much different. It can have plenty of rain. The weather tends to be very mild. There's snow on top of the mountains, but if it snows in my house near the bay, it's normally gone by lunchtime because it's mild and wet. In general, the scenery in Scotland, especially on the west coast, is absolutely magnificent. I'm very fortunate to live on this island with an amazing community. We have like any community, we have lots of issues. We have lots of ferry issues. We have lots of affordable housing issues. We have all kinds of issues. But in the bodies on the island, not just Coast, but the different bodies that I meet with, there's a real campaigning zeal. Basically, I was once told by a councillor, our council is actually on the mainland, and we quite often think they don't really understand. It's an urban council, they don't really understand our rural areas. And I was once told, it took me a wee while to figure it out, that when I met a councillor there, and he said, the problem with you islanders from Arran is you're revolting. And then he looked at me and winked at me. He said, "You're always revolting about something or other." and it was a compliment, because basically island communities that we have to raise our voice, and if we know what we're talking about, we can get listened to and we can make change happen.
What an inspiration, Howard. Thank you so much for giving us your time and your wisdom and your passion. You will not escape this episode, though, without the bonus round. Everybody does this. It's just a fun little thought exercise. And I'm just curious, because you are a sea live. I too, I live right near the salt water here. But we have this fun little tradition on this show where we imagine if the sea was rising and you had to get out of the house, and of course you're going to take your loved ones and your pets and those dearest to you. But if you could only take one physical thing, what would that physical thing be that you would save?
My boat. It's sat
That's
right
awesome.
outside my. It's sat right outside my house. I take my boat,
Yes.
family, possessions. I'd probably make sure my diving gear was in the boat.
Hey, take it all. If practical and heartfelt, that's great. And if we're imagining more about you metaphysically, like if there is one, if you could only take one trait that makes Howard Howard, what would be that one trait that you would take?
Well, my trait is probably persistence.
Yes.
It takes a while to realize that there's never one battle It's a series, and you've got to be in it for the long term, because winning one campaign, there's always another battle to be had.
Howard Wood, I can't thank you enough. You are a warrior and a gentleman and a scholar and truly an inspiration to me. Thank you so much for your time. If folks want to check out the work you're doing, where can we send them to go look and get involved?
So, of course, they've got an excellent website. It's www.arrancoast.com.
Wonderful. Thank you, sir. I appreciate you so much. And let's definitely stay in touch, and we'll see you down the trail.
Thank you very much, Mark. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Likewise, sir. Take care.
How do you say what you love? How do you say what you love? How do you say what you love? How do you say what you love?
Thank you for listening to Save What You Love. If you like what you're hearing, you can help keep these conversations coming your way by giving us a rating on whatever platform you're listening from and leaving a comment on Apple Podcasts. It really helps get the word out. Check out photos on our Instagram feed. We're at Save What You Love Podcast, and you can get links from today's featured guest in the show notes of this episode. Join our growing community by subscribing to our newsletter at avaswild.com and then clicking on Connect in the upper corner. You'll get exclusive offers on wild salmon shipped to your door and notifications about upcoming guests and more great content on the way. That's at avaswild.com. The word save, spelled backwards, wild.com. This episode was produced by Emily Fern and edited by Patrick Troll. Original music was created by Whiskey Class. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you all down the trail.